Hi, welcome to Moments in History. I'm Linda Shenton-Matchett, author, speaker, and history geek. While researching stories, I unearth tons of intriguing historical information that does not end up in my books. So I've created this channel so I can share these tidbits with you. Today, if you couldn't tell by my bonnet, we're going to talk about the Homestead Act of 1862. On July 4th, 1861, President Abraham Lincoln told the nation the purpose of America's government was to elevate the condition of men, to lift artificial burdens from all shoulders, and to give everyone an unfettered start and a fair chance in the race of life. He went on to say that an act was worthy of consideration and that the wild lands of the country should be distributed so that every man should have the means and opportunity of benefiting his condition. He followed through with the speech with the passage of the Homestead Act of 1862, which remained active for 124 years until it was repealed in 1976. It resulted in 10% of U.S. land in 30 states, equaling 270 million acres, which is the equivalent of 250,000 square miles, to be claimed and settled with 1.6 million deeds. Most of the homesteads were west of the Mississippi River, but did not include the state of Texas. Montana, followed by North Dakota, Colorado, and Nebraska, had the most successful claims. The Act's leading advocates were President Andrew Johnson and newspaper editor and publisher Horace Greeley. From the mid-1840s until his death in 1856, social reformer George Henry Evans lobbied Congress and sought political supporters with the slogan, "Vote yourself a farm," calling for free public lands for homesteaders. The Homestead Act had a few qualifying requirements. A male or female homesteader had to be the head of the household and at least 21 years of age. Any adult who had never taken up arms against the federal government of the United States could apply. Immigrants who had applied for citizenship were also eligible. He or she had to live on the designated land, build a home, make improvements, and farm it for a minimum of 5 years. The filing fee was $18 or $10 to temporarily claim the land. The homesteader also needed 2 neighbors or friends to attest to the government that they had fulfilled the requirements. Union soldiers were able to shave off time based on the amount of time they had served in the Civil War. Land titles could be purchased from the government for $1.25 per acre following 6 months of residency. Settlers would find the land and file their claims at the regional land office, usually in individual family units, although others did form close-knit communities. Often, the homestead consisted of several outbuildings or structures beside the main house. And although not necessarily fraud, it was a very common practice for the eligible children of a large family to claim nearby land as soon as possible. That way, after a few generations, a family could build up quite a sizable estate. No systematic method to evaluate claims under the Homestead Act existed. Land offices relied on affidavits from witnesses that the claimant had lived on the land for the required period of time and made the required improvements. In practice, some of these witnesses were bribed or otherwise colluded with the claimant. Other abuses occurred to manipulate the provisions of the Act to gain control of resources, especially water. The intent was to grant land for agriculture, but in the arid areas east of the Rocky Mountains, generally 640 acres was a little too land to be a viable farm, at least prior to major federal public investment into irrigation. A common scheme was for an individual acting as a front for a large cattle operation to file for a homestead surrounding a water source, under the pretense that the land was to be used for a farm. Once the land was granted, other ranchers would then be denied the use of the water source, effectively closing off the adjacent public land to competition. That method was also used by large businesses and speculators to gain ownership of timber and oil-producing land. The federal government charged royalties for extraction of these resources from public lands. The Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976 ended homesteading. By that time, the federal government policy had shifted to retaining control of Western public lands. The only exception to this new policy was in Alaska, for which the law allowed homesteading until 1986. The last person to receive title to land claimed under the Homestead Act was a man named Ken Deerdorf for 80 acres of land on the Stony River in southwestern Alaska. He fulfilled all the requirements of the Homestead Act in 1979. However, he did not receive his deed until 1988. Today, the Homestead National Monument of America is located outside Beatrice, Nebraska, and it commemorates the Homestead Act. Why this tiny Midwestern town? Well, that's where Daniel Freeman, deemed to be the very first homesteader, filed his claim on January 1st, 1863, by the Department of the Interior, and that's where he established his homestead site. There are several well-known books, movies, and plays that reference homesteading, such as Laura Ingalls Wilder's Little House on the Prairie series, that describes her father and family claiming a homestead in Kansas and then later the Dakota Territory. Laura's daughter, Rose Wilder Lane, published a novel called Freeland, which describes the trials of homesteaders in what is now South Dakota. Willa Cather's novels O Pioneer and My Antonia featured families homesteading on the Great Plains. Oscar Michaud's novel The Homesteader from 1917 is a semi-autobiographical story of an African-American homesteader in South Dakota shortly after the turn of the 20th century. Kirby Larson's young adult novel called Hattie Big Sky explores one woman's attempt to improve on her family's homestead before the deadline to retain her rights. You're familiar with Rodgers and Hammerstein musical Oklahoma? Well, that is based on the Oklahoma land rush that came as a result of the Homestead Act. Then there's the 1962 Elvis Presley musical film Follow That Dream, adapted from Pioneer Go Home, that features a family that homesteaded in Florida. Then the Nicole Kidman Tom Cruise movie Far and Away centers on the main character's struggle to obtain their 160 acres. And last but not least, the 1953 movie Shane depicts some early homesteaders in Wyoming who opposed a cattle baron who abuses, threatens, and terrorizes them, calling them pig farmers, sod busters, squatters, and other insults. When the rancher gets violent, the homesteaders are divided over whether to leave or to hold on to their claims. A drifter working on one of the homesteaders reluctantly tries to take action. I hope you've enjoyed today's moment in history. If you'd like to learn even more history, please stop by my blog that can be found on my website, www.lindashentonmatchett.com. And please consider subscribing to my channel. And click the bell icon to receive notifications of new episodes that are generally released on the second and fourth Friday of every month. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.